Welcome to the America's 360 podcast. Get the inside scoop and the outside perspective on the latest developments from Canada, Latin America, and everywhere in between. America's 360 is a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars.
I'm your host, Bruna Santos. The people of Brazil have spoken and former President Lula is back. We know the second round of the presidential election was held on October 30th, and after a very tight race, the tightest election in the Brazilian history, Lula defeated the incumbent Jair Bolsonaro by 2 million votes margin. So to discuss that, the effects of that in the internal and external politics, and also how it may or may not impact Brazil and the region and perhaps the world, I have here very special guests. We will analyze all these matters in a round table of experts. I have the pleasure to have them here, and I have the pleasure also to count with them as Brazil Institute fellows. So I have Raoni, who is a professor at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, Daniela Campello, a professor at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation, Luiza Duarte, American University Research Fellow and also a journalist, and Cesar Zucco, who is also a professor at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. Welcome you all. So I will start with you, Daniela, and it was the most bitterly fought election in the Brazilian history, and I think that we all can say that democracy was the winner, but I would like you to talk a little bit about what were the forces playing behind the campaign? We saw Bolsonaro using the state machine in his favor. We saw Lula also working really hard to get together a very broad coalition of business people, of politicians, of former rivals. And we also saw, we see actually the expectation of the first year of government for Lula to be one of a very tight budget. So I would love to hear your thoughts about it, and also to hear your general ideas about the election results.
Hi, Bruna. Thank you so much. Happy to be here again at the America's 360 after a couple of months. So let me start. I wanted to make it clear for those who are listening to us from abroad that this election was a very special election in Brazil, and was one in which maybe in the future, it's not even going to be classified as a free and fair election. And I say that for three reasons. The first one is that it's the use of the machine that you mentioned. And just to give people the idea of what happened in Brazil, Brazil was declared in a state of emergency after the invasion of Ukraine. And thanks to this state of emergency, all the controls that we used to have in terms of preventing presidents from using expenditures right before the election to boost their chances of winning, they were lifted. And then what happens is we saw an amount that it's been considered, nobody knows exactly how much, but it was around $5 billion were spent in 3 months in cash transfers to the poor. So this had a very strong effect in the popularity of Bolsonaro, who was disapproved by more than 50% of the population, and suddenly his disapproval fell very dramatically. The second factor was that there are claims of very organized and structured vote buying, and the claims of harassment of workers by employees, of people of faith by their religious leaders. So this happened in this election to a level that was never seen before. And the third event that happened, and I think that matters a lot, was that in the day of the election, there were more than 500 interventions in traffic. Which meant that people were removed from public transportations. They had to show their documentation, and this slowed down and eventually prevented some of them from reaching the vote station. So this was unfair in many ways. Lula won by a very tiny margin in the end, but my impression is that if this was not the case, Brazil would be in a very serious conflict right now, and we'd be going the path, following the path of like Venezuela and Hungary and other autocracies. So this is very serious. The good news is that I believe that the broad coalition that supported Lula during the election is going to be the broad coalition who's going to govern the country. And I remember in past episodes, people were discussing whether the Lula from 89 or 2002 will be there. I think it's going to be a very moderate Lula, centrist Lula, opening up for all sorts of policymakers from all ideologies. And that's a very good news for us.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I got the sense that, for example, Gleisi Hoffmann, who is PT's president, the Workers' Party president, she said in one speech, this is not going to be a PT government. This is going to be a broad coalition government. But there is a saying I really like, which is winning is hard, but governing is even harder. And we know that in Brazil, more than ever, we need Congress to govern, right? So I want to hear your thoughts, Cesar, also about what are the governability concerns for Lula, how hard it's going to be. Is it possible to change the structures of power as soon as he get there and get the more control over the budget again? What are your thoughts? And please draw this picture for the audience.
Lula will probably have to rewrite the manual of how to work with Congress. So obviously there's an emergency situation in several concrete policy areas, but in order to get anything done, he has to work with Congress. And while I do expect a return to a more consensual and dull way of doing politics than what we had over the last years, the fact is that Lula will be facing a much more hostile environment than what he faced when he took office last time. And why do I say that? Political polarization inside the Congress, which had already been increasing over the last 3 legislatures, we have indicators of that, increased even further with the last election. The center parties have essentially emptied, the center has emptied. The center parties have become much smaller, and the right of center parties, including extreme right, have increased. And Lula being on the left is relatively much further away from the average or the median congressman than even he was back in 2002. Now, having said all that, which is the doomsday scenario, I'll just add that the left and Lula's core coalition does not have 171 legislators, which would be the magic number to prevent an impeachment, for instance. We're talking about impeachment as a hypothetical here, but it is a pending threat against the government, even though he hasn't done anything yet, right? But so that's the bad scenario. Now, the good scenario is that Lula is a very skilled politician. He did assemble a pre-electoral coalition, electoral one that was fairly wide. In the second round, he brought in other forces. He is looking for technocrats that could play to the center-right to form his government. And the right of center parties in Brazil were never hyper-ideological before the current government. So we do have an expectation that they will go back to being the run-of-the-mill type of Brazilian conservative, which conservative in many ways, but not radically, ideologically, and militantly opposed to the government. So Lula, we expect, will bring in a large chunk of Congress. It won't be easy. It won't necessarily be cheap. But the result will mean that it will not be an extreme left or even a center left government. We're looking at a very moderate government just by the constraints he's facing. That said, there are a couple of key developments to watch, alluding to what you mentioned earlier, Bruna. One, I think the first key development to watch is the election or the elections of President of the House and President of the Senate, which are the first thing that happens when the new Congress convenes in early February. But people are already jockeying around for the positions. The likely current holders are likely to or have a great chance of being the future holders. But a bad move in this election could actually doom Lula's entire agenda moving forward. So we have to keep an eye to see what's going to happen on that. The second key development to watch is what's going to happen with the budgetary procedures that were modified over the last 3 years that you mentioned. Over the last 3 years, Congress has taken on much more prerogatives than it used to have. It has done so without scrutiny. So a lot of the budget is now decided literally in secret or with much more difficult access by the population, by the opposition, by anybody else, and by the media. Lula has campaigned against this, but the sitting Congress wants this to continue so they can allocate resources as they will. So this will be another interesting point of negotiation, which is already happening and will probably be decided also by the start of the next legislature. So I think these two key issues will determine maybe the fate of any of this concrete policy agenda that Lula might have.
Yeah, just one specific follow-up, Cesar. I'm curious. When you say it's not going to be cheap, what exactly you mean it's possible? Is it possible to see mensalão, the type of like buying support directly by sending Pix or direct payments?
I doubt that we'll have a mensalão because the mensalão was tried and might have worked politically for a while, but it backfired immensely afterwards. Right? But mensalão was essentially, was allegedly a story in which the government passed resources under the table to politicians. Now, the current secret budget was another different type of solution for the same problem, right? Which is, how does the president work with Congress, a Congress that is very interested in particular benefits to their home constituents or their funders or their campaign financiers, and less interested in policy, and a central government that's interested in policy. So there's a quid pro quo here that will be necessary. I expect Lula to come up with a different arrangement. He might have to cede space officially in government. He might have to give legislative space. He might have to change support to some groups at the state level, throw around his weight to help the careers of certain politicians in their own states. But that's why I mentioned he might have to rewrite the handbook of executive legislative relations, because he will need to bring them on board. And we know that Congress was elected by the population as much as the president was, and many congressmen are very interested in obtaining very specific benefits or very concrete budget lines, right? So finding a way, this will be the key institutional arrangement necessary. Well, I do expect that the secret budget, though, would be modified, because this has been the current government's mode of behavior, and Lula has already campaigned against it. So I expect that to be thrown out and something else to be put in place. We don't know yet what.
Yeah, we don't know yet what, and I'm looking forward to it also. But let's see if there is someone who can like rewrite a playbook to negotiate with Congress. It's Lula. So I think he's a very skilled politician, definitely. And he has also talked a lot about his priorities and some of his priorities, of course. And one of them, and it was really clear in that really good speech, I think, his victory speech was really like a statesman speech. And I think that he mentioned one phrase I love, which is somehow like, Brazil is back, the world miss Brazil. And he mentions, it seems like he was literally turning back the page of the climate skepticism that we saw of Bolsonaro, and all these years of accelerating the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. And I want to hear from you, Raoni, who is an expert on this matter. And what do you think are going to be like the main priorities for Lula in terms of climate diplomacy and in terms of the Amazon, and how he's going to get it done? Because I saw also people saying that maybe it's going to be difficult to get it done because of budgetary constraints. So how you see Lula playing this?
Yeah, thanks, Bruna. It's going to be a major challenge, and actually, just to start off, for the first time in Brazil's history, the environmental agenda has been an important topic of the elections. And interestingly, at some point, even Bolsonaro tried to boost his, actually unexisting environmental credentials by, torturing some numbers towards his own narrative, as if he was a big environmental protector. And so definitely that's something new. And so we have environmental issues reaching a total new height within Brazil's political discussion. But of course, that's not going to be enough. So what to expect? First, I think we should expect having a strong Minister of Environment, someone who's highly respected, maybe a politician, and we have different names coming up. For instance, we can think here of Randolph, who's someone from the Amazon, someone who has strong connections also to the environmental agenda, who does not hold at the moment a place in office because he did not run for senator again. And also you have Alessandro Molon from Rio, who lost the run for senator, who also has strong connections to the environment, and is also someone who might be willing of that the Workers' Party might be willing to give some visibility. So I'm not really worried about or even, you might see a return of either Marina Silva or even Isabella Teixeira as Minister of Environment. All of them are very good options. So I'm not really concerned so much about who's going to be the next Minister of Environment, because I'm sure that they're going to walk in and do a good job. There's going to be an opening towards civil society and NGOs. What really, really worries me, who's going to be the next Minister of Agriculture, because that's where we are going to see basically this let's say this tug of war between the environmental sector and the agricultural sector. Because, I mean, even in the best moments of Marina Silva and Isabella Teixeira, we had this process going on. And so you had this, this little dance where the environmental sector would do 2 steps forward, and then the agro would do a step back, and then you would have that, backs and forths and balances and checks and balances. But we don't have time for that, really. The damage done by Bolsonaro was so great that unless we have someone from the agricultural sector taking up the Minister of Agriculture and really work, together in an integrated way with the Ministry of Environment, we're not going to see deforestation going down in the speed we need. And just, to give an idea how bad we already are, all the deforestation that has been done from August onward is already accounted. So it's already part of the results of Lula's government, because that's going to be basically accounted for the 2023 deforestation results that which goes from August to July 2023, and actually are going to be probably published just before the COP next year, so around November, December. That's usually the schedule. And so we are looking at bad numbers here, probably worse than we had this year. And then you had also this whole issue that deforestation takes place with a lot of effort, a lot of capital. And so even for 2024, we might not have a positive result. So it's really about, changing the course of this huge transatlantic as it moves towards, an iceberg, and doing that in a short time, and doing that with a lot of effort. So I think that's, one of the main challenges here in terms of delivering the kinds of results we need to then be able to change Brazil's perception in climate negotiations. Because Salles, for instance, wanted to sell carbon credits, which are basically results from reduced emissions and from reduced deforestation. But before selling something, before actually wanting something in return, you must produce results. And so Brazil is really under a lot of pressure to produce those results right now.
Yeah, that's really incredible. But I also got the impression that, the climate change and all the issues related to it are like at the center of policy, and also foreign policy. For that, I want to ask you, Luiza, what can we expect of Lula in terms of regional policy, especially not only with Latin America, but also with North America? How might the regional dynamic in other Latin American states be impacted by this election results?
I think the Lula's wins were really well received internationally. There's a preparation, ongoing editorials from main prominent newspapers already indicating that they had the preference for Lula, that they would support, indicating that Lula was the favorite in Brazil. Lula is respected abroad. He's a veteran in the international scene, and his team is working on those bridges abroad for years, building relationship with Europe, but not only. And that counts. I think just the fact that Bolsonaro is no longer in the government is already a window of opportunity to Brazil to reset international relations, to reset its foreign policy, and reorient it to become a critical player in the global agenda. And with Latin America, we saw the new pink tie that not necessarily indicated ideological alignment, but maybe just a rejection of these governments that are in power and in a situation of socioeconomic impact after the pandemic. So a very different scenario from the 2000s, very different international context with China, Latin American rivalry, and the war in Ukraine. But regarding to the region, to Latin America, Lula indicated during the campaign and also in this powerful victory speech that he will reinforce regional integration, that he wants a Brazil that's more active in the international scene. And he mentioned Mercosul, UNASUL, CELAC as forums to achieve that. And but I think we also in that case need to see who will be the minister and how this will play out. We also know that there is a desire of re-engage with BRICS, but yeah, we will probably remain with certain limitations. I think the word for this government, the way I see, is reconstruction, that we are much more trying to recover what was destroyed in the past years than arriving with new ideas and new projects and new policies. So it's very much trying to contain the damage that was done in the previous years. And this also goes to the foreign policy. I think it will be a work to reconquer trust, international trust, and open again doors that were closed and recover the Brazil image that never been in that low. I don't know. I live abroad for 15 years and following foreign policy in Brazil, engagements abroad, and the amount of negative pieces about Brazil during Bolsonaro years are exponential.
Bruna, may I say something about foreign policy? I think that there are many issues like the EU-Mercosur relationship, like the fine line between China and the U.S. and nearshoring. But I think that in the case of Venezuela, I believe that Lula is in a very good position to lead the discussion of redemocratization. Lula was always very pushed into confronting Venezuela. He never did. But I think that now is very much in favor of him, and he could be a major player in mediating the return to democracy in Venezuela, which is a big foreign policy goal, I guess, in the region.
That's great. That's a great comment. Yeah, I mean, if we see that potential, it's great. Lula has always been like some sort of coordinator, mediator between also interests and countries. So I want to hear also maybe from you, Cesar, what are other priorities in terms of policymaking for Lula? In terms of like what's top in his list right now on January 1st?
This list could be potentially go on, and I'm sure Raoni, Daniela, and Luiza would also add priorities to the list. I just want to mention social policy for a very specific reason. It was one of the biggest achievements of Lula's first term, the Bolsa Família, now Cadastro Único, and now the social assistance program. And since the pandemic, discussion around social policy has been reduced to a single number, which is the value of the government's emergency and then later permanent assistance check. This number is currently 600 reais. It's been a hot topic button in the election. Now, focusing on a single number like this, while very useful politically, right, it was a very big campaign topic, it hides the fact that very well-designed social programs have been dismantled over the last 3 years. Important discussions about the goals of these programs, the targeting and evaluation have been abandoned. And this has essentially set us back 1 or 2 decades in terms of the quality of program design. So I think reconstruct, and there's a lot of expertise in Lula's camp, but just being able to escape from the 600 reais discussion, the single number, back to why we need social policy, what we want it for, and how we're going to do it, is going to be a big priority. In this one, I have a lot of faith that he will be able to do it because there's a lot of expertise.
And if I can add something to Cesar, I think that's going to be another fine line that Lula is going to have to walk, which is like going back to these programs that existed before and were dismantled at the same time that he will have somehow to create a new fiscal anchor and adjust the economy for the new situation that we don't know exactly how bad it is, because everything is secret right now. So I think this, if I had to say like T0 priority, is going to be like how to keep these programs and at the same time make sure to impose some kind of austerity policy that puts the budget back to where it should be.
And at the same time, deal with opposition, because we have a very strong Bolsonaro opposition. Bolsonarismo is here to stay. I just want to add, when we talk about elections, I see time is running up, is about disinformation. When Daniela very complete explanation about the problems we facing in the election, about vote coercion, but also the disinformation environment where the election happened.
Yeah, that's great. There are so many like important emergent questions about it, and I'm glad that Cesar brought up like rethinking the social programs, because Bolsa Familia itself was a result of a number of incremental innovations that happened over the years and different programs that were put together, and it took years for Brazil to think of how to address poverty in a more systemic perspective. So not only as cash transfers. So it's definitely an important issue. And Raoni, I want to hear your final thoughts. What Lula is perhaps going for COP, right? What it represents, and is he's gonna like tell who's going to be the next environmental minister there? What is your expectations also about high-level negotiations there and the role of Brazil? Final remarks about it.
Yeah, I mean, Lula is going to be at the COP and actually most likely on the second week, when I'm going to be there as well. So I'm very excited to follow up close from Egypt, how that's going to unroll. And first of all, it must be said, it's kind of unusual because the president of Brazil still is Bolsonaro. So normally you would have a president and a recent elect president basically working on the transition and not already making statements and trying to negotiate with other sovereign nations. However, the situation in relation to the Bolsonaro government is so bad that my sensation, also talking to diplomats from other countries, that they want to, they really want to start the conversations as soon as possible and to restart reconstruction as soon as possible. So my anticipation is that Lula is going to be there and is going to be well received, as he was already invited directly by the president of the COP from Egypt, which is also very uncommon. And we hope not only that he might mention who's going to be the next and announce who's going to be the next Minister of Environment, but also maybe make some interesting announcements about how he intends, in concrete terms, to rebuild Brazil's forest conservation and climate policies. So I think that's going to be a very exciting moment for all of us.
Absolutely. And we will definitely need international cooperation, the private sector, everyone on the same, working towards the same goal. So now final.
Yeah, and if I can say something on that, Lula said in his winning speech that Brazil is back, but now the question is who is going to back Brazil?
Raoni, let me add something, and I was going to ask you that before. We have the Congress, right? And the Congress, the agricultural caucus is much stronger, much wealthier than it was before in the first and second Lula government. So I think it's going to be a major how can I say it, that a major resistance to these policies in the next government. He's going to have to negotiate with this group very heavily. And I'm a little skeptical about their turn towards green economy. We've seen the last policies that they were trying to enact in the end of this government. They were all in the opposite direction, right?
And who is actually going to decide on all that is China. Because in the end of the day, the Western countries and the United States, Europe is moving towards very strong deforestation-free supply chains and requirements. And that's been increasingly felt by the Brazil's agribusiness. However, they always have the idea that they insist that, they can just sell more to China and then problem solved. So depending on how how China is going to behave in those regards, then it might, and if China actually accelerates its turn towards greening its supply chain as well, then Brazil would be left out of options. And then at that point, the agribusiness would not have much to say. They would have to comply. So I think it's interesting to see how it's not down to Lula nor to Congress alone, but there is also this broader international context that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, I agree.
Talking about China, what do you think, Luiza? Is it possible with like China growing demand for soybean and all to somehow compromise both climate and agribusiness? What are your thoughts on that, and how may like also the relationship between Brazil and China be?
I hope the new government will look to a very old demand from the Works Party to diversify Brazilian export agenda and not be that dependent on soybeans, and that Brazil will invest in reindustrialization and technological transfer and in a bunch of other types of cooperation, with a more complex cooperation with China than a cooperation that is almost exclusively depending in commodities. And I think this is problematic. Is increasing dependency is being signalized for years, and we saw some. Well, we already know all the challenges for this government to put forward what is being promised, but I think there is awareness, at least more strong in this government, to try effectively to diversify a little bit, and that's what I expected to happen. But from the China side, I don't think much will change, and I don't think they are that close from in the next 4 years to completely transform their demand of soybeans. I think they will remain in this relationship if it doesn't come from the Brazilian side to pressure in a more complex cooperation agenda.
Thank you, Luiz, and thank you, everyone. We will need to leave it here. Raoni, Daniela, Luiza, Cesar, thank you. We look forward to learning more from you in future episodes.
You have been listening to America's 360, a podcast about the innumerable ties among the nations of the Western Hemisphere. You can subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. To learn more about our programs, please visit wilsoncenter.org. And please join us again next time for another episode of America's 360.